Welcome everyone to the Department of Justice webinar on Building Strong Grant Applications. My name is Christina and I will be your moderator for today. It is my pleasure to turn things over to our subject matter experts from the Department of Justice, James Smith and Angela Wade. Justine Sudo from the National Criminal Justice Training Center will also be presenting on building a strong application process. Your first presenter today will be James Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I would like to thank you for calling in to today's webinar. We hope that you find it very useful, and we ask you to start thinking of your questions and make sure that you ask them at the end. So I just want to make a few things very clear regarding this webinar and the structure of CTAS. CTAS has been around for 10 years now, but CTAS itself is not an actual program. It's a structure in which 10 separate programs function. Those 10 separate grant programs are comprised from the following offices: the Bureau of Justice Assistance, BJA, the Office of Community and Law Enforcement Services, CTAS, Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, OJJDP, Office of Victims of Crime, OVC, and Office on Violence Against Women, OVW. Some of our partners that assist us in administering these programs are EOUSA, OTJ, and OJP as a whole. The primary goals of CTAS are to increase access to tribes, streamline the grant process, and a number of other opportunities. But I want to focus a little bit on the streamline the grant process. For those of you who are CTAS veterans and are familiar with this program, you'll know that we've changed the structure up a little bit this year for 2019, and you will see that we made an effort to streamline the solicitation and make it shorter. And we also coupled the solicitation with an application companion guide. So as you're working on your application this year, you want to make sure that you have both of those things handy to ensure that you have a successful application process. Critical review of the solicitation. Couple of things to think about when you're sitting down to do not just a CTAS grant application, any grant application for the Department of Justice or any other federal agency. You want to determine that you're eligible based on the criteria that's laid out in the solicitation by the agency. Sometimes they have stipulations. For example, for CTAS, you have to be a federally recognized tribe. Also, you want to think about, can you realistically complete the application by the deadline? You know, a lot of times applicants will wait till the last minute, or they'll think that they can do something, and when they start to work on it within the last 2 weeks, they will realize that they don't have everything they need. They might not have had enough support to get it done. And so you want to think about these things in the beginning. Can you submit a quality application, not just can you submit one? Because there's a big difference between just submitting an NEO application and submitting a quality one. Quality applications are what gets funded, so you want to think about that. You also want to think about what is required in the application. What kind of documents do you need to prepare? What kind of registrations do you need to set up for? And while technology is a great thing, it also comes with its own share of problems. And so while registering, for example, for GMS is an easy thing, it cannot be so easy if you're waiting till the day before or the day of to do it. So you just want to kind of make you like a little checklist or a little to-do list on some of those key things. Also, you want to identify your resources. Who can help you out if you need help with this, whether it's a grant writer, whether it's the federal agency itself and its support systems. For example, for CTAS, you would be reaching out to the response center, whose information is in the solicitation, both their email address and their phone number. You would reach out to them for simple questions or individual questions regarding a purpose area. They could get you in touch with that person. If you're having problems actually submitting your application or some technical issues, you would be reaching out to the GMS help desk, which their information is also laid out in the solicitation. You also want to think about what are the key elements or key components of the particular proposal that you're applying for. In CTAS's case, you want to make sure that you have a tribal and community justice profile, detailed budget workbook for every single purpose area that you're applying for. And then you also want to make sure that you have purpose area narrative for each purpose area or program that you're applying for. And I just want to take 1 second to clarify something too. You will hear a lot of us CTAS experts mention the word purpose area, and you'll hear some of us say program. They're one and the same. So for example, the Office on Violence Against Women, purpose area 5. Purpose Area 5 is a tribal governments program for OVW. They're one and the same, and I want to make sure that applicants start understanding that you want to identify it with the program and the purpose areas being one and the same. How will your proposal be evaluated? Each element that we're asking for or component has a certain score or percentage that it will have, so you want to pay attention to that. And you're going to be scored on those things. You want to pay attention, for example, if you're applying to Purpose Area 1 cops, or if you're applying to Purpose Area 5 or 6. Each one of those purpose areas has its own specific requirements and things that they're going to be looking for. So you want to be looking there, and you want to be looking for the requirements of the overall solicitation. Create a timeline. This is very helpful. So you can think of a timeline or a checklist kind of being the same but not the same. You want to identify the key things that you're going to have to gather up, the things that you're going to have to produce in order to get a successful application. In the case of CTAS, your online application, you're going to need GMS access. You're going to need a tribal resolution, one that's actually signed and completed. Indirect cost agreement for the current year in which you're applying for. If you don't have that, the indirect portion of your award will be frozen if you're awarded. Other attachments to think about: letters of support, MOUs, resumes, job descriptions if they're applicable, project development. So here are the key things that I mentioned before: tribal and community justice profile, demographic form, budget detail workbook to include a budget for each purpose area and a narrative for that, PA narratives, and a timeline. I just want to point out a few things that may have changed from previous years. So the timeline is now part of the purpose area narrative. In the past, the timeline's been worth 5%, and the purpose area narrative has been worth 50%. We combined the two this year, so it's worth 55%. But just because they're combined, you shouldn't look at the timeline as being any less important because it's not a standalone document. You need to take the same effort that you would if it was a standalone document when you're incorporating it into your narrative, because it really gives peer reviewers and it gives us federal staff a clear view of how you're going to lay out and achieve what you said you're going to do. So you want to, think about that. Also, we built some checks into GMS this year to help you guys out, because we know sometimes folks are rushing and they may forget something. Well, GMS is set up this year when you get to the final page, the submit page. If you don't have the 3 requirement documents, which is a tribal and community justice profile, if you try to submit and the system doesn't recognize that that's there, you won't be able to. The same thing with the budget. And then for the purpose area narrative, let's just say you're applying for 4 purpose areas. If you have 3 but not 4, it's still not going to move forward. So that's just a check that we built in to really help applicants this year. Start a grant proposal file. This is very important. I would venture to say that you should keep a binder or like some type of thick expanding file folder, as well as an electronic file, so that you can have 2 copies of what you're working on. And I would say that's true of everyone who's playing a part. It's usually not just one person putting this together. There's usually a finance person helping out. There's usually a budget person, and then there's kind of like an overall in charge person. Everyone should be on the same page on your proposal, just like everyone should be on the same page if you actually get awarded. You want to gather important resources prior to writing, so when you sit down, you're not running all over the place trying to get things together. Create a Word document with headers or an outline may be helpful. Identify the sections that you think are going to take the most time, and then prioritize which sections you think you should do first. And in CTAS, we have a detailed checklist. You want to use that. You can add to it, but I would definitely use that as your basis. So here's kind of a sample checklist, but there's a more detailed checklist for CTAS 2019 in the solicitation that you want to refer to. It starts on page 60, and it goes all the way into page 62. We'll be doing another webinar on February 12th solely on this checklist, but just to give you a preview of kind of what it's like now, this will help you out. Of course, there's a hard deadline of any solicitation that you're going to apply for, but that should be what you're working towards, but you want to set your own deadline. So for example, with CTAS, The closing date is February 26th. You don't want to have your deadline that day. I would encourage each and every one of you who are seriously considering about applying to make your deadline anywhere from a week to 2 weeks out. The reason for that is it allows you to sit down, be your own peer review or DOJ federal panel, look at the things that we said we're going to evaluate your application and start to tear your application apart and see where it measures up with those things. And then it allows you time, if you find discrepancies or errors, to fix those things before you're submitting. Planning, planning, planning. You have to map this out. It's not something that you want to do at the last minute. And it really requires a team approach. While I've seen some wonderful presentations put together by one person, it's a lot of work. And if that one person's gone, all the historical knowledge is gone as well. So you really want to, as much as possible, make this a team effort. Not only should it be the leadership, it should be the folks that are actually in the field doing the work of the grant. Everyone should be on the same page with this grant and your application. You also, as you're putting your proposal together, you want to think about how what you're proposing to get funding for would sustain once you no longer have DOJ funding. That's always key. You don't want to make something that only has an impact for 2 or 3 years. You want to think long term. Some more tips, questions to kind of ask as you're looking at your proposal and evaluating it and sitting down. Does the strategy address the issue at hand? So for CTAS, for each program area, there's a template where we ask very strategic and specific questions. You want to make sure that what you're proposing and what you're saying your problem is, you want to identify that as it relates to those questions. What are your outcomes? How are you going to measure that you're actually being successful? We care about those things, and we care about seeing those things in your application. They're helpful for us, and they're also helpful for you. And also, if what you're proposing, is it something that can really come to fruition with funding? A lot of times we see great ideas, but it may not be in the scope of the funding, so you want to think about that.
If we could launch the poll, please. So the question is, what part of the grant writing process do you find most difficult? Please select one of the following: overall grant narrative, budget detail and budget narrative, goals and objectives, identifying performance measures, or page limitations and writing concisely. And the response to what part of the grant writing process do you find most difficult? 11% said the overall grant narrative, 24% said budget detail and budget narrative, 9% said goals and objectives, 33% said identifying performance measures, and 22% said page limitations and writing concisely. James, do you have any comments on those?
The overall narrative, I think the thought process on that is to look at the template, of course, look at the questions that we ask, but you guys are going to know your story, your problems, and your atmosphere better than we would ever know it. So don't sell yourself short there. Take the opportunity to lay out very clearly for us what's going on. I think sometimes when I read applications, I see where applicants start that and then they kind of stop, or I feel like they're just telling us what they think we want to hear. No, we really want to know what's going on, tell what the problem is and how our funding can help that. That really helps us out a lot. I think it helps you out a lot as well. With the budget, just be very clear, break costs down, make sure that you're reading the solicitation fairly, because a lot of offices are kind of laying out what you can and can't use funding for. So a lot of times we see a lot of unallowable costs. You want to make sure that you don't include those things in there. You know, I know, for example, for Purpose Area 5, they have some specific set-asides for travel requirements. You want to make sure that you're allowing for those, as well as some other, so there's a lot of guidance that's given to you in the solicitation for the budget that if a lot of applicants would actually follow that, they could, their budget would be very good. And the other thing I would say about the budget is making sure that you put a detailed budget narrative. Like, it should make sense when we look at your budget and when we read your purpose area narrative and we look at the budget narrative, it should all be in sync. It should make perfect sense. And I know sometimes applicants get very worried about the little space that's in the Excel spreadsheet. You are completely allowed to attach a separate Word document that says additional, you can title it additional budget narrative, and you can write as much as you need to support an item. So don't worry about that little bit of space that's actually in the spreadsheet. You can provide additional documents if needed. Goals and objectives, I would just say, just be very clear on those. Like you're telling us what the problem is, just be very clear on how you plan to get there. Performance measures, we can talk a little bit more about that if you guys want to reach out to me, but I would say just think about how you're going to measure your success and, think about your outcomes. And then page limitations, we actually shortened the page limitations this year out of feedback that we heard, because a lot of folks sometimes felt that 15 pages was too much. They wanted it streamlined a little bit more. So, just think in terms of what you need to tell your story, but we could also brainstorm on that a little bit more if folks want to reach out to me. And like I said, we'll have another webinar on the 12th where you can ask about these things as well. I would now like to take the opportunity to turn this over to my colleague, Angela Wade, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the CTAS budget process. And I would encourage you to jot down notes and save some questions for her at the end. She is very knowledgeable. Angela?
Thank you, James. Good afternoon. I'm going to give a brief overview of the budget and some things you need to be mindful of as you start gathering your material to actually complete the budget. My colleague, Michael Williams, will go into a lot of detail during tomorrow's session. So at the top of this slide, you see a link that will take you to the Department of Justice website, which will get you to the Budget Detail Workbook. The Budget Detail Workbook is an entire Excel document which contains a demographic form for Purpose Area 1 applicants and a budget detail worksheet with a narrative for each individual purpose area. Now, no matter how many purpose areas you are requesting funding for, you are only required to submit one workbook. The workbook has individual tabs for each purpose area. So there will be multiple worksheets within the workbook that you may need to complete depending on the number of purpose areas you're applying for. Now, the budget detail worksheet will provide a detailed computation for each budget category. You're going to list the total cost of each one, and you're going to show how it's actually calculated. The budget detail worksheet will show a complete itemization of all of your proposed costs. And again, there should be a clear link between items proposed and the activities proposed and the items that you are including in your budget. So the first category is the personnel category. So as you're gathering your information, just be mindful of what you're requesting funding for. So in the personnel category, you want to list each position you're requesting funding for. If you have the specific name of the employee, you can list that, include that information as well. You want to include the annual salary rate, compensation rate. You want to also tell us the percentage of time or how much time this particular individual is actually going to be working on your project or on your grant program. One thing you want to remember is if your organization is currently paying a cost of living increase, you want to include a separate line item for a cost of living increase as well. And with each budget detail category, you need to include a narrative. So for example, in the personnel category, in your narrative, you're going to include a description of each position along with information on how you got their rate of pay and actually what they're going to be doing to support your program. So for fringe benefits, you should only include fringe benefits for those individuals that you have included in the personnel category. So for fringe benefits, we're looking for things such as your FICA, health insurance, retirement, etc. Generally, fringe benefits should be based on actual known costs or an approved negotiated rate. So keep in mind that when you're listing your fringe benefits, you want to list them by each fringe benefit category. So for travel, the first thing you need to know is your organization's travel policy. You need to know your travel policy as well as your local travel policy, and you need to state that policy. If you do not have your own travel policy, you need to use the federal policy. So you want to make sure that your travel is tied to your particular program. A lot of times with the CTAS grants, each purpose area has mandated travel. So you want to keep that in mind and make sure you're reading your solicitation. So equipment. Again, with the policy, for equipment category, you need to know your organization's policy for capitalizing equipment. Generally, if a piece of equipment falls under your capitalization policy, then it should be included with the supplies. Supplies category, those would be those items that will generally be expensed in 1 year, that equipment that is not being capitalized, and you want to explain how these supplies are going to be used to support your program. Construction category. Generally for the construction category, it's only allowed in purpose area 4, and it's generally for renovations or existing structures, not for new construction. The subawards procurement category. This is different from previous years, whereas subawards and procurement are included in one category. You want to make sure you list your subawards separately from any procurement contracts. For procurement, you need to know your organization's procurement policy. So you want to use whatever procurement policy you use for your non-federal funds. Again, if you don't have your own policy, you need to follow the federal policy. Remember the threshold for consultant rates. Just because there's a threshold does not mean that's the limit to the amount of money you can pay a consultant. Generally, you should be paying a consultant what they're worth. If you are using sole source and it's over $250,000, you need to make sure you get prior approval and include a justification as to why you're using a sole source. The other categories, just be mindful of the other category. You need to list each item by type and the basis for the money you're requesting funding for. Indirect cost category. If you have an approved indirect cost rate agreement from your cognizant federal agency, you may be able to charge indirect costs. You need to make sure you include a copy of your current indirect cost rate agreement. And if you've never had an approved indirect cost rate agreement, federal indirect cost rate agreement, then you may be eligible to use the de minimis rate. And if you are elected to use the de minimis rate, you need to put that in writing to the Department of Justice stating your eligibility, and you are electing to use that. Just a few more things to be mindful of. No matter how many purpose areas you're applying for, you're going to submit one workbook. There is a separate tab for each purpose area. So you're going to go into each tab you're applying funding for and complete the budget detail for each budget category. Now, James just briefly mentioned the budget narrative. Your budget narrative should thoroughly and clearly describe every category of expense listed in the budget detail worksheet. Your budget narrative should have explanation how your costs are going to support your program and should correspond with the information and the figures that you have provided in your budget detail worksheet. You also want to make sure that you are reading the solicitation, and James mentioned this also. You need to read the solicitation for each of your purpose areas. There are specific requirements for each purpose area, so please go through those before you start completing your budget. There may be unallowable costs listed in there, requirements for specific travel, so please be mindful of that. For your subawards and procurements, again, you want to list those items out separately, and please make sure you include a copy of your current indirect cost rate agreement if you are requesting funding for indirect costs. And at this point, I'm going to turn you over to Justine. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Everything that happens in our tribal communities impacts the work that we do. And that's another reason why action planning is so important. Sometimes people might feel a little frustrated with this planning process because you might think that it takes too long. Actuality, I feel like if you have a lot of people coming together to assist with your action planning, it should help to minimize the amount of time and effort it takes to do this planning, because you've got a lot of good minds, all with different perspectives, all representing different aspects of the community. So we all know that sometimes what we have in one community of our tribal nation isn't the same as what we have in another community that might be, 10, 20, 30 miles away. So action planning can be applied to anything that you do, and for today's webinar, we're going to apply it to this grant writing process. And I'm going to be referencing the workbook quite a bit now throughout these slides. So just follow along with me. And if you have the Word document open, then feel free to type in or jot down notes as you think of them so that you don't lose track of those thoughts later on when you go to actually do your planning. The key to any planning project is to know what you're planning to do, for whom, and why. Why are you going through this process? It should be based upon the strengths of your community with a mission to provide some type of service that will meet the needs of your people. The mission should be based on the tribal nation's vision so that there's some alignment there, and at the very least, the vision of the tribal program that you're seeking to create or enhance. So this reflects on the nation's values, and once all of these things are taken into consideration and everything is in alignment, then you'll know that you've got a project that could be responsive to meeting the needs in your community. These are some of the elements of strategic planning, and James spoke to many of these already because they're inherent to what you're planning to do in your program narratives that you'll be applying for. So generally, everything focuses on the community. You'll ask questions of whatever they might be. Are we meeting the needs of the community? Are there gaps in what we offer for services? Do we have the right services, but maybe there's a barrier for the community to be able to access these services? So you'll gather this kind of information and analyze it. And whatever the data tells you, those gaps or those problem areas are the ones that you're going to want to focus on addressing in your purpose area narratives. Also, be sure to focus on the strengths of your program or your community overall, because these can be leveraged then to create a good response to alleviate those problems, those issues, or the gaps that you're finding. So that will be your solutions. So in your workbook, you've got page 2, the situation assessment. Some questions that you'll want to ask yourself. Preferably, you'll be working in a multidisciplinary group. Think about how you would respond to these questions. What are the sources of your community's strengths and challenges? What community resources are available to increase the strengths and decrease these challenges? When you're looking at your current situation of the program that you're with, you'll want to know about the past, present, and future. And if you look at workbook page number 2, you'll see that it's divided up into past. What events or happenings have contributed to the whatever the problem might be in your community? It could be alcohol or substance misuse. What aspects of enrichment have caused your community to thrive and nourish the people? And think about the programs, the people, any customs, traditions, ceremonies that you might have had that were to bolster people up. So you'll answer these questions then for the past, where you are now, currently in your program area, and for the future. What's working well for you that you want to build on or strengthen? And in looking at those gaps or some of these painful or stressful events that has happened in your community in the past, what would happen in the future without an intervention? So when you fill out this workshop, you will be able to better understand really where you are and where you want to go. And this will be the focus moving forward for your planning or action planning. The focus will be like a guided question, and it really answers what do you want to know more about. It could be a hypothesis, and then when you start doing your strategic planning, your data collection and needs assessment, you'll work based off of this question. If you deviate from answering or responding to this question, then perhaps there's a need to bring in another program area to collaborate with, or maybe this is just an opportunity to refocus on the thing that is the most concerning for you. So this multidisciplinary approach, we look at it in concentric circles. So consider the people you work closest with to be your core advisory board or your core planning team. And they would be comprised of people who are your key stakeholders in that second circle. The stakeholders might also be the people that you serve, whoever your clients are. They could be key partnering agencies. And in the third circle, this is where you'd start to identify those internal programs and people who are resources that help you to achieve the goals and objectives of your program. And in that fourth circle, it's a little further away. These could be external resources. Maybe an external resource might be a county child protective services program, county social services. It could be a shelter or like a women's shelter that's not run by the tribe, but it's run by an organization that you work closely with. These are all resources that you really want to consider. So when you think about key stakeholders, think about who can help you. And I'd like to see you jot those things down too on page 4 of your workbook. Just jot down really quickly who are key people that's going to help you with your strategic planning, with planning to build or enhance the programs and projects that you already have. Think about key partnerships. This could include the clergy, the elders in your community, other businesses. Maybe since you can't spend grant dollars on incentives, you could reach out to those local businesses that might be able to give you some incentives that would not only benefit their business, but it would help you to bring a draw into your community events or activities. There is an activity on page 4, and it's a case flow chart. If you have a specific program or project area, you could start documenting or this case flow of what is the process for somebody that is taken into your program. What is the process or what happens for somebody to make an appearance in your tribal court, for example? So from that precursor to appearing in court, you document all of the entities and all of the people that come into contact with that person. And as you map this all the way through, you'll start to recognize who some of these key partners are that you could use to help build your program, enhance it, that you could use for possibly a letter of support. You might enter into an MOU or an MOA with them, outlining what it is that you are offering that program or agency, and they would document also what they agree to provide to you. So this case flow chart is a way to help you to recognize more clearly who your partners are in the community. And it's a good opportunity too to document what data points or information exchanges happen or take place as you map through this case point. So on the next page, page 5 of your workbook, there's a community mapping box there. You can document some things there, create like a mind map of all of the interactions or access points that people take to get into your program area. And also on page 5, there's a resource development. You can start identifying the organization or the people, including their name, address, and opportunities for collaboration with that organization. And sometimes we don't always see who those people are until we've actually taken the time to map those things out. And in this wheel of partnerships here, there certainly are many more other partners that you might be able to consider. Just consider yourself the center of that circle. That's you and the program area that you work for and represent. And so think about who do you have reach out to. So as you're doing some action planning to build up or enhance your program, you want to gather information. You could hold talking circles, and you could ask maybe 4 or 5 key questions from the people who are participating to get information about what they perceive your project is all about, or what they perceive are the major crime areas or concerns in your community. And it could also involve surveys. So there's different ways that you can conduct community assessments, but the important thing is to reach out so that you can get their input to help you understand real problems or concerns and even the root cause. what's causing it, where are the problems worse in the community? Are things happening in one of your neighborhoods and not in another? And if so, why? So a lot of reflective questions here for you to start thinking about what's working well for your project and what you might be most concerned with. Be mindful that the feedback that you get from your community could reveal problems and symptoms of a bigger problem. So in this example, adolescent substance abuse in the school, that could be a big problem. A symptom of that problem could be the students, more students are failing than ever before, or there's an increase in truancy that we didn't see before. And if you wanted to dig even deeper, then you might consider where these symptoms are coming from, and maybe a bigger symptom is that there's their parents are struggling, and the parents might be working like swing shifts somewhere or not always present at home while the child is home from school. Whatever it is, your data will inform how you identify what your problems and symptoms are. So your data collection and needs assessment, think about statistics and the numbers that you need to verify or prove that there is a real issue within your program or within your justice system. And these will help you to get away from just perception, and they'll get you into more of the fact-based assessment. This is what we're seeing, and now we can define or distinguish what we want to do about it. Don't get me wrong, perception is also important because the perception that the community has is reality to them. So if you're offering services to do something and the community is saying, well, I don't think they have any services at all, their perception is that is their reality. So somewhere there's a miss. Maybe they just don't get the information, or they don't have access, so they don't know about your project or program. So when you look at your data collection, just think about, what do we need to know? Where do we go to get that information, and how do we plan to use it? We all know that there's a lot of surveys that get done in our communities, and people get tired of it. But if they really know what's being done with that information and they feel confident that it's going to be used, then they're more likely to participate in any kind of interviews or surveys that you might have. So in your workbook, on page 6, you will start to document the kind of information that you'll need to help better understand your project or program area and where there might be gaps or needs that need to be filled in with these program area narratives that and the funding that you're applying for. For the data analysis, there is a worksheet on page 8 of your workbook. And as you start to analyze that information, you're going to start seeing some main themes coming out of that of those results. And there's some questions here to ask. Are these related to the justice systems that you previously identified, or are these something that are new? Are these problems or symptoms? Do we currently have services to address these issues? And identify the program or the service, and then start to determine, why aren't people seeing that this is already exists, or maybe you have to find a way to bolster it. So that's all of your data collection and data analysis portion. There is also an exercise or a map on page 7 that will help you to create a plan for gathering this information between now and when your CTAS application is due. But you certainly can use this at any time, planning around any kind of issue. Again, questions related to the data analysis. Just think very deeply from multiple perspectives, not just an individual or one small department. Maybe bring in those key stakeholders who can help you to answer these questions. Now, oftentimes, our program narratives ask for a problem statement or a simple problem. What are the main issues that you're seeing in your community? Your data collection and that assessment of the data will help you to be able to identify the answer to all of these questions. And you can write a response on page 9 on your workbook answering these questions. It'll help you to better understand very concisely what is the issue, and that will lead or flow naturally into a response to alleviate these problems or issues. And that's where your goals and objectives that you develop later on are going to come into play. But in order to be very concise and focused on the scope and the nature of the problem, this is helpful to be able to stay focused, because like I said, we try to be all things to all people sometimes in our program areas. And if you identify other problems that are not necessarily something that your tribal department or organization can respond to, think about a partnering stakeholder who could take that on, because maybe it's more aligned with that department than your own. So that information is important. It might need to be shared with other areas besides yourself, but just focus on the key program or problems that are specific to your department or your part of the organizations that is applying for specific program applications from CTAS. So I know that was a lot in a short amount of time. Do we have any questions about what was discussed so far?
Great discussion, Justine. Justine, we do have a couple of questions at this point. There are page limitations on the submission. Are there space limitations on both the narrative and the tables? Can we single space on both or either?
Yes. You can use tables. You can use like a call-out box in a Word document. You can insert like a text box. You can use those things to insert maps that might better or clearly describe like the vast distance across your tribal community, and maybe that might better paint a picture of response times for emergency personnel, law enforcement, things like that. Take advantage of tables, graphs, pictures, whatever you need to more clearly paint that picture. And then of course you can use a smaller font in tables, and you can single space in tables. Your program area templates, if you use those templates that are accessible along with the solicitation, there are questions posed for your narrative. And if those questions that are posed in the template appear double-spaced, to make them single-spaced. Respond to the question in full, but if there's an example that's listed on that purpose area template, then delete that example because it's not related to how you're going to respond. I mean, it might give you an idea of how you'll respond, but it's extraneous text that you don't need taking up precious page space.
This is James. I would also say, just to piggyback off Justine a little bit, let me give an example. And I'm totally making this up just so you guys can get the point that I'm trying to make. But let's just say you don't simply want to restate what we're putting in the solicitation. So if we ask you to put performance measures, you don't simply want to say we will have performance measures. Like, that doesn't tell us anything. If you want to use that statement, that's fine, but it needs to be followed by, yes, we will have performance measures. Here's how we'll go about that. This is what that will look like. You get what I'm saying? Like, you want to explain it out. You want to be detailed and very clear.
Thank you for that, James. Definitely. None of those questions are necessarily yes or no questions. They should always be described and elaborated, because remember, the peer reviewers might not know your community, and to be a more objective in their review, they would only consider the information that's presented to them. So you want to be clear and concise in how you write, but on the other hand, if you don't provide enough narrative to clearly explain or paint that picture, then there's no choice for them but to deduct points.
Great, thanks Justine and James. James, there is a question that is relating to your portion of the presentation. In the presentation, you said the application was made shorter and more streamlined this year. The page limits for the profile and the narrative were shortened from 15 pages to 10 pages. However, on the purpose areas that I'm working on, all of the questions from the previous years are the same. This is challenging because we have to answer the same question in 10 pages or less when we previously had 15 pages to answer these questions. The challenge is that the page numbers were cut by 1/3, but the questions that are required to be answered are the same. Can you speak to this at all?
Sure. So that was a debate and dilemma that we had with ourselves too when we were discussing it, but we had an assessment and from some listening sessions and from assessments, like that was a big thing. Folks were saying, is there a way to cut down on how much we have to write? And so we gave it a shot by approaching the page number. I will certainly bring this back to my team if it doesn't turn out to be a great thing for 2019. I'm sure they'll be open to increasing it in 20 if it doesn't work out. But it was one of our ways of trying to address something that the field was asking for. I will say too, in reading some applications, I definitely can understand where it's challenging. The applicants spend a great amount of time putting information into the narrative that really has nothing to do with the questions that we ask and nothing to really do with the basis of the application. Like a lot of times I'll read and there's a lot of fluff there, and by the time they get to what we're actually asking, they've used a lot of their space. So we're also hoping that by decreasing the page numbers, that it will force applicants to solely focus on the key information that we need to have in there and not necessarily so much fluff, because the fluff isn't what's going to get you funded. We want to see exactly answers to what we're asking. We want to see key information and not all of that other extra stuff a lot of times that we get. And I say that not to gloss over the fact that you bring up a valid point. And I know for some applicants who love to be very detailed and who write a lot, this is going to be challenging. And so there is no way to, I guess, make everyone happy. We're hoping that this works out. But like I said, for 20, if it doesn't and we find that we need to increase the page numbers, then we will do that. I will also say that there's nothing wrong with making the font smaller when you're addressing the questions. I know we say 12, but we've also allowed some flexibility when the questions are left on the template and applicants single space it a little bit. And so you could do that. You could also, I don't think that we require a specific font style. So I know there's some fonts where the type of font allows you to write more than some other kind of fonts. But if you want to, reach out to me via email, we can certainly brainstorm on that a little bit more. The goal certainly is not to make this challenging for you guys at all. We really were trying to come up with a way to decrease the writing and things of that nature. But for the person that asked that question, if you want to reach out to me at james.a.smith@ojp.usdoj.gov, we can brainstorm on that a little bit more, and I can make sure that I'm answering your question the way that you're hoping as well.
Great, thank you, James. For the timeline, the follow-up on that one was, does the timeline have to fit into the 10-page limit too? If the narrative is limited to 10 pages, does the timeline have to be part of that 10?
So, okay, I'm going to answer this in one or two ways. Ideally, yes, but if you happen to choose to list it as a separate attachment, no one's going to have a problem with that. We would prefer it be in the narrative. And when I say that we want it to be detailed, I guess when we were getting standalone timelines, they were really, really good. Really, really good. Some exceeded, more detail than we probably needed. But I think if you're fighting for space, just think of the key things in your timeline. And then maybe if you want to expand upon that in a separate document as an attachment, that's fine too. There's ways to kind of still get us information.
Great. Thank you, James. And then we do have a question regarding the budget. And that is, can you describe the consultant's threshold more? Are grant writing services allowable?
For consultants, the threshold is $650 a day. Although we do have that threshold, you can't pay a consultant more than that, generally, because you're supposed to be paying a consultant what they're worth. The thing is, if you are paying them more than $650 a day for an 8-hour day, then you just need to be able to justify as to why you're paying them what you're paying them.
Great, thank you. And Dean, would you like to continue with your presentation?
Sure thing. I just wanted to point out, though, that on the solicitation, not in the guide, but the formatting, the only thing it says about formatting is that applicants should use double space and a 12-point font size. And it says nothing about Times New Roman, which in the past they used to. So as James said, some of the fonts might be a little narrower than others. I mean, that might help. Every little bit helps. And I'll tell you, some of the best, in my opinion, so some of the best applications I've ever submitted were where I was like 2 full pages over the page limit. And I had to cut down that much verbiage to get within the allocated page limits. And it forced me to be more clear and concise in how I said things or explained things. And that very well may include a table that is single-spaced, like we discussed. And also, like if there's if you're responding to one of those template questions and in your response there's like 1 or 2 words hanging on a line all by itself, you have to rewrite that line or that paragraph. Find a way to be more clear and concise so that just 1 or 2 or even 3 words aren't hanging by themselves. If you know, I hope you know what I mean by that, but every little bit counts in freeing up some space for yourself. So moving on, proposal planning and implementation. So I'd like to think about what positive changes do you want to see as a result of your planning efforts? Now, these positive changes that you want to see should be directly related to the data that you already collected and analyzed. Think about what the intended results of your project would look like when it's done. And then the roadmap to get there will be your action steps and your objectives. That responds to how are you going to get there and how are you going to know you've achieved success. So again, after the data analysis, you're going to have a clearer picture about what is actually happening. The current condition, what is, and then the desired outcome is what should be in the future moving forward. So this model of a vision and a desired outcome, it should be in alignment with your mission then to achieve that desired outcome, and all of your action steps, goals, and objectives will help you to achieve your mission and the overall desired outcome, which also should contribute to achieving your program vision or the tribal nation's vision. And there's arrows on either side of this little pyramid here going up and down because some people start with a vision or a mission and then they'll create goals and objectives to respond to that. Other people might see very tangible, concrete action steps that you'll want to take in order to alleviate those problems or those issues that you identified before. So sometimes you start with those steps and then it's a little bit more plain to see overall what is this goal that I'm trying to achieve with these action steps. So there's no right way or wrong way to this. It's just a way of thinking or how you process things. I also like to use an analogy of a tree. Like the fruit on a tree is what the community benefits from. That's what the outside community sees. And all of those branches are what you and your program area are doing to spread out and to grow so that that fruit can be obtainable or accessed by the community. The roots of that tree, the trunk of the tree, those are all of your knowledge, your partnerships that you have, the strengths of your program area that you build on to be able to make that fruit accessible. I hope that makes sense. So the program area narratives, the templates, don't necessarily require you to have a vision or a mission statement. There's information here on your workbooks, page 10, that will give you an idea of how to put your vision and your thoughts of that future to paper. You could create a mind map about the things that stand out most to the people in your program area or on your planning team. So they will be a key aspect of creating a vision that you will want to achieve. So this is an example: a nation of healthy and strong future leaders guided by traditional values and self-worth to make educated and informed decisions in their daily lives. So that's my vision. You'll see in the back of your workbook that there is a case study that we put together. It's somewhat based on factual information, but in response to these issues that we read about in the case study, this was the vision that I came up with. And so now the next step would be to create that mission, which is how I plan to reach that vision. Maybe not in my lifetime, but someday I would want to see those youth who are using all that they have, you know, for fulfilling their potential. So the mission is why you do what you're doing and how it is that you're going to do it. And it answers these questions. Who are we? What is it that we value? And who are we serving with the programs or services that we offer? Why do we serve them? Maybe it's to alleviate something, or maybe it's to support people, or whatever it might be, and how you're going to do it. Now, it doesn't have to be very long, but you're going to want to touch on these things. So here's an example mission. Develop a trauma-informed approach to education, interventions, and preventative programs to address adolescent alcohol and substance abuse within our school. It's very targeted. The mission is not necessarily achievable in my lifetime, but this mission, people can respond to a mission. You can read this and know that there are specific things that you're going to want to do eventually to achieve this mission. So here's an example of why a mission is important, even if it's not required in these purpose area templates. So in this model, the first organization, look at all of those green arrows as if they were members of your planning team or advisory board. Everyone comes to the table with their own agenda because it's natural to do that. They come wearing the hat of the work that they're doing and representing the project area or the department that they come from. So they might have their own agenda, and collectively they want to work to achieve your mission or that vision. But you can see if they're not all in alignment, like they are in the second organization too, then they can kind of go off into tangents. And work effort might be a little bit diluted. So you want everyone on your planning team or all of the staff that you have with your department to be in alignment with what that mission is. This also helps people to stay sort of in their lane, I guess you could say, because we want to help people. It's real easy to get deterred or sidetracked thinking, again, that we could be all things to all people. And we don't want to do that. We want to stay very focused. So in your workbook, you would jot down a few key words or phrases that you can build on when you meet with your advisory board or planning team later on. Okay, and it doesn't have to be like well written or wordsmithed out or anything at this point, just some key thoughts or ideas of what you know your mission will be. And again, this will help to keep focus to what it is your action plan will be about. Action planning. So this desired outcome, it's what you want as a result of implementing your plan. Now, I use desired outcome because sometimes I guess my brain doesn't always think that way in terms of goals and objectives. I think about the bigger picture of what ultimately do I really want to see. It's more realistic and more tangible than a vision, but it's not as specific, I guess, as what a goal would be and those objectives to support that goal. So you don't have to do this if you're not comfortable with it, but it's just a way that I use to bridge that mission to the vision or the goals to the mission. So here's a desired outcome. we want to prevent our youth from alcohol and drug misuse in the schools and to end their self-destructive behaviors. So that's what I really want in the end. It's not quite a goal because this is so vague, you wouldn't really know how to address it. But if I know this is my desired outcome, I can get to be more specific with the goal. So it's similar to that purpose or the aim, but these are general intentions of what you want to accomplish. So an example might be, I want to be a healthier me in this new year, right? So that's my goal. And then I'm going to use that goal to start to figure out and plan, how am I going to get there? So here's another example goal: adopt a culture of trauma-informed approach to address adolescent substance abuse. So these are two goals that I might use to respond to my mission that I shared earlier. So how you're going to achieve those goals are your objectives: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So this is more so the action steps of how to achieve the goal. It's going to be very specific and measurable. Here's an example to that first goal: decrease the alcohol and drug abuse incidents in the school by half by the end of the first semester and eliminate these incidents by the end of the school year. So that objective is very specific. There's something measurable about it. We're going to decrease incidents by half and eliminate altogether by the end of the school year. That's a pretty hefty objective. I think we can do it. And I have a timeline in which I want to plan to achieve that. By the end of the first semester for part of it, and by the end of the school year for the second part of it. Okay? And then there's another objective there too. So building out on those objectives, you're going to identify the specific tasks and activities that you'll use to achieve that. Now, these are very much more specific. It even involves like who's going to be responsible and specifically when are these things going to happen. Think about if the activities you're proposing are aligned with your mission. And again, if it's financially possible. If it's not aligned with your mission, you need to either revisit the data that you collected before to make sure that the activity you're proposing is going to support alleviating the problem identified through that data collection process. These all are interconnected. So an example to that first objective is to identify your multidisciplinary team. Who's going to help you to create this approach, right? And you're going to have monthly meetings. Another activity, commit to shared agreements and establish the scope of the MDT. The next task or activity, design and implement interventions to at-risk youth at the school on a weekly basis. So you're going to identify those most at-risk youth and you're going to work with them weekly. Again, this is all aimed at that trauma-informed approach. Any questions on this part of the planning so far?
There's been some questions on clarification on the page limitations and as well as font sizes. It's highlighted in the RFP that 12-point font is the font that they're requesting, but it doesn't say what type of font, for example, Times New Roman or Arial. And then also for headers and footers, do those have to have specific font sizes as well?
I'll take that. So there isn't a certain font style. So whether it's Time Romans or Carrier or Calibrate, whatever you choose to use, that's fine. We're not a stickler for that. And headers and footers don't have to be a particular font either. And what was the other part of the question? The beginning part, I think.
As far as just clarification on the page limitations, and as far as I know that there was questions on the timeline, if that could be separate, just clarification on the page limitation for this year.
Okay, so each office has its own specific page limit requirement. So all of the purpose areas except purpose area 3 and 10 have a page limit of 10. Purpose area 3 and 10, they're allowing a range from 10 to 15. So I just want to be clear on that. And if you go to each purpose area that you're applying to, if you look at the template, it'll say up top at the beginning before you start writing what the page limit requirement is for that particular purpose area. I'll offer a suggestion that I've seen some grantees do as well. So you could choose to completely remove the questions from the template. You don't even have to use the template. We strongly encourage, but you're not going to be graded down or looked upon any differently if you choose to use your own format in terms of not taking the template that we have and actually using it the way that we have it. So for example, let's just say, and I'm totally making this up, say there's a purpose area, I don't know, let's just say, for example, purpose area 10, and this is an example, so don't quote me on this for purpose area 10, this is for example's sake only. Let's just say that purpose area 10 had 8 questions that it was asked, and each of the 8 questions was written out, and you were going to use that template or you were not going to use it. You could choose to not use that template and just number the questions 1 through 8 and just start your answers like your number 1 and then your answer, number 2. And as long as you know, like you can include a statement at the beginning, just say, I followed the order, I'm answering the questions in the order of the template, and that's fine. That saves you a lot of space. I've seen applicants do that, and that's fine. You just need to make sure that if you're telling us that your answer for number 1 is responding to number 1, that you just need to make sure that that's actually the case. But that's a way to free up space, and I've seen it several times.
I would also add to that, if you're looking at a narrative, right now I'm looking at purpose area 3, and the first question, identify 1 or more of the crime and public safety problems described in the tribal community and justice profile, and then it goes on for 3 more lines. Once you answer that question fully, you might delete all of that font and then just bold crime and public safety problems, dash, and then start writing. And you could still use your double spaced and single font, but the peer reviewer would know that that's the question that you're addressing because you have at least a brief description of what it is that's being asked in that template. A shortened version of that rather than taking up the 1 to 4 lines of that the question takes up.
Thanks, Justine and James. Where do we find out the point value for each section? Can you repeat the value of the timeline? And also, can we submit 2 proposals with 2 budgets for the same purpose area? For example, a proposal for healing to wellness court and a proposal for a treatment program.
So for the first question, you can find that so starting on page 6 of the solicitation, it'll tell you what the sections are worth. So for example, the tribal and community justice profile is worth 30%. The purpose area narrative that includes the timeline is 55%. Your budget workbook and budget narrative is 15%. And if you're applying for COPS purpose area 1, that 15% would also include your demographic form, but that is the only office that uses that. So yeah, that's the score breakdown there, but it starts on page 6 of the solicitation and it carries over to page 7.
And the second part of the question was, can we submit 2 proposals with 2 budgets for the same purpose area? For example, 1 proposal for a healing to wellness court and 1 proposal for a treatment program.
You know, I've never had anyone actually ask me that. If Wendy or if the person that asked the question, if you can hear me, if you can shoot me an email with that question and I'll get a definitive answer for you. My email address is james.a.smith@ojp.usdoj.gov.
Great, thank you. There is a question on how should tribes address the research section in the CTAS purpose area?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. Are they asking about a specific purpose area? The question's a little too vague for me to be able to answer.
Sure, we'll follow up for additional clarification. While we wait, there was some additional clarification asked for on having points docked for not including something, and that's listed on pages 60 to 62 on the checklist. Can you go over the points that would be docked for not including things?
So I want to be very clear. So when you're looking at the checklist, and so let me be very clear on this. Everything that's listed on this checklist may not apply to every single program office and or purpose area. So that's why it's very important that if you're, say for example, if you're applying the COPS purpose area 1, and then you're applying to BJA purpose area 3, and then you're applying to OVW purpose area 5, there are some things that are going to be synonymous with all 3 of those offices. And then there are going to be some things that only COPS is asking for, that only OVW is asking for, that only BJA is asking for, and you need to make sure that you cross-reference and have the things that works for all of them, and then have the things that they're asking for specifically. So you need to do that. There is no specific point value assigned. The peer reviewer who's reviewing your application will know what's required for CTAS overall, and then what's required for each purpose area. And as they're reading your application, they're not necessarily, they will deduct accordingly, but they're more so looking at, like, they score you. Of course you get a score if something is completely missing, but in terms of if something's there and they're reading it, I'll give you an example. Let's just say, you know, they're reading your narrative and you have one there. So they're definitely not going to take points for not having the narrative, but you could lose points if your narrative isn't good. So it's just, you know, it's, I don't want to say subjective, but it depends on who's reading it and how they view it. So if you have 3 different peer reviewers reviewing your application, you know, one person could feel one way about it, another person could feel that you did really good, and another person could feel differently. So it really depends on who's reading it and how they're interpreting, you know, the instructions that we've given them. But you certainly wouldn't lose points if we've asked you to include something and it's there, but you could lose points if it's not good quality or if it doesn't measure up. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, James.
Peer reviewers too, we were talking earlier about those templates and the fact that you don't have to use them, as James said, but if a peer reviewer can't find the information they're looking for to score on in the order that they're expecting to find it, that can be really frustrating for a reviewer who's, you know, up to their eyeballs, 10 grants times 10 pages each grant, you know, 100 pages. That's overwhelming for them. So try to think of it in terms of the peer reviewer's perspective. The easier and most identifiable your response to each of those questions are, the easier it will be for them to score you and score you well.
And I will also add one more thing to that. And I don't think I touched on it here. I know we'll touch on it on the webinar on the 12th, but I think it's important given the question that was just asked. You want to make sure that your documents have clear file names. So if we're asking you for a tribal resolution, it's a very good idea that you label the document that. And the reason for that is you don't want to risk accidentally being eliminated because we can't find your tribal resolution, but you called it something that someone would never think of as a tribal resolution. So it's very important. Mm-hmm. I would encourage you to use the names that we have in the solicitation, but I can't force you or require you to do that. So if you don't use the names that we have spelled out, at least pick something that we will know exactly what it is.
Thank you. Yes.
So, and so let me just clarify that. So what I mean by that is in the solicitation, we have detailed budget workbook and budget narrative. If you just decide to title it budget and budget narrative, that's fine. We will know exactly what that is, even though it's not the exact name we have in the solicitation. Hopefully that makes sense.
Great. Thanks, James and Justine. And moving along, Justine, would you like to continue with your presentation?
Sure. I'm going to be very brief with these. The evaluation and sustainability piece is sometimes overlooked because sustainability, that's a really tough one for people to respond to. And the evaluation piece is really about those performance measures that are required in the solicitation, but it's also part of the way that you will determine the success of your project as it's implemented. In evaluation, we think about qualitative and quantitative data. We need probably a combination of both because it paints a clearer picture about the success or maybe still some gaps that are within your project. So it's important to satisfy, of course, those performance measures requirement, but it also justifies your program. How awesome it would be if you could take like within a year of your grant project and present a report to council with some data that shows how well your program is operating. What a great way to make sure that that project stays funded beyond the life of the grant because the community sees the benefit and the value of what it is that you're doing. So the evaluation also helps you to make program improvements, to help you make decisions about the project if things can be pared down a little bit or if something, an aspect has to be bolstered up more. Maybe the program's running wonderfully, but it's not accessible in evening hours or something, so then you decide you're going to expand your hours of service. Whatever it is, it helps in every aspect of your project. So think about the goals that you're trying to achieve and how you would evaluate the success of those goals and the process. The process is how you're doing and the outcomes, how is it impacting your clients or your services moving forward? Is there a long-lasting impact? So again, quantitative, that's about the numbers, and the qualitative is what does it look like, feel like, and the mixed method is a combination of those two. And just a way to think about it is in the room that you're sitting at right now, what is the quantitative information that you could gather from the room that you're in? You might determine the temperature of the room. You might determine how many pieces or piles of paper you have sitting on your desk. And the L, I mean, is your space comforting? Is it relaxing? Is it conducive to doing your work? Is it too loud? Is it not private or confidential because of all the other program areas that are walking past your space? So those are different ways to think about how you might evaluate your projects. Collection tools. Again, these are very similar to the needs assessment that you would have conducted before when you're trying to determine what needs or services are needed for your community or your program. Ask yourself these questions. Again, what are the gaps? In what ways do the findings of our data validate what's working well? What are the emergent themes? So you're constantly analyzing, assessing, and analyzing. It's a continual circle before you plan for a project and after you're planning, after you implement a project. Think about measuring the number of people served. If your objectives say that you're going to do something like serve those at-risk youth once a week, that's how you would evaluate. How many youth did you serve and for how many weeks? And you might ask, what is the difference or the change in behaviors or in choices that these youth are making at the beginning of the semester versus the end of the semester versus the end of the school year? So those are all different ways to evaluate success. Think about for your project, what will be measured, how the data will be collected, who's responsible, and how do you define that success. And there's information or a worksheet on page 14 of your workbook that will help you to answer those questions. Consider evaluating the data as it relates to your project specifically, and especially think about those impacts and outcomes for the project that you've implemented or are going to implement. As far as sustainability goes, it's very much an assessment, a needs assessment also. Think about what the community would look like without your project and if they had everything they needed because of your project. What factors are revealed in the assessment that you will want to answer? Sustainability helps you to be best responsive to your clients' needs and to make you more valued in your community in hopes that you could gain more resources or more financial backing, whatever it takes to make sure that your project is sustained. Think about that wheel of stakeholders, those first, second, third, and fourth circles. Think about who in your community map or your case flow chart might be interested or have a vested interest in making sure that your project continues. Don't forget to think about outside organizations from your tribe also. I know that's challenging for some communities, but sometimes all it takes is a phone call and an invitation to have a cup of coffee or something to start making those bridges to sharing resources and increasing value. So in the sustainability process, you look at all of these aspects of services, staff, the costs to run these services and to employ the staff, and the resources available. The steps: foster commitment, clarify expectations, build momentum for change, and instill capacity for change. These seem very self-explanatory at times, but when you're working hard and you're wearing many hats because you're not just working on this project, you're working on other programs within your tribal community, it's sometimes challenging to make sure that you hit upon every single one of these. So the worksheet on page 15 and 16 are all about sustainability. And it gives you some ideas like how you can write in like the project that you're trying to achieve, the mission that you're trying to achieve with the goals that you've established, and identify all of these ways that you might be able to better foster commitment from the community, from your staff, from partners, and from the community in general. Clarifying expectations, making sure that everybody knows and understands their role in the project or the program that you've developed or that you're going to develop. Part of sustainability is also making something standard practice, and that's that codifying policies and procedures, something that will make it commonplace so that even if you leave, there's still a process in place that would be your best practice moving forward. And sometimes that means training staff related to the project. And that's also, building momentum for change. It's creating awareness, it's sharing knowledge and collaboration, which is sometimes hard for us to do, especially when we're so busy, like I said, or sometimes our program areas or departments work in silos. That can be very challenging. So it's important to build momentum by that collaborating. And instilling the capacity for change, learning from your successes and failures and reflecting upon that, developing new services or processes or systems that might be more responsive. And you can only learn how to do that if you do that data evaluation, data collection and program evaluation. And cross-training staff, making the investment into the program. These grants that you can apply for through CTAS is such an incredible opportunity to build in resources and software and materials that maybe you didn't have before that is going to be an investment now to sustain your project moving forward in the future. Always think about your project, if it's still in alignment with your mission and vision. If it doesn't ring true, then something has to change. Either your mission has been accomplished and you need to strive for something new or different. If your activities are moving away from your mission, then maybe those aren't the activities for you. Maybe that can be shifted to some other department. The reality check on page 16 is just simple questions. What functions of the project do you want to keep? What jobs do you want to instill for your community, or what program services have to remain? How many staff people are you going to need to fulfill this? You know, it's easier to apply for grants when you're applying for development projects, implementation, or enhancement, because usually your department or area has the staff to manage that project because they're already working within a program or a department. So it gets a little challenging when you're creating a program from scratch, because now you're going to have to rely on your grant funding to staff the position, or you're splitting the staff time across other projects. That's really challenging. So hopefully you'll find other resources within your tribe to fund your staff more so than with these purpose area applications. And the cost, think about the investment that you'll need to keep the functions of the project, the program, the staff, or whatever services you're doing. How much is it going to cost to maintain those services? Is it a one-time investment that you're applying for? Or is it going to be ongoing monthly costs and expenses that you'll always need to make sure is funded? And then the last question is really, can we do it? Is it realistic? Can we create this reasonable sustainability plan for the project besides just responding with, I'm going to apply for more grants to fund it? What are some of the sustainable activities that you already have in place? Does somebody fill in for your project or services if something, like if your department has an all-day staff meeting, for example? Who takes on those clients of yours or the people that you serve if your project people aren't available? What happens then? So maybe that's an aspect of sustainability, is that people are cross-trained. Then think about the tasks that your advisory board could do. Your advisory board might not be the staff people that you employ and that you work with in your department. Your advisory board might be people from other departments, other program areas. So the one thing I've learned about advisory boards is if they don't have anything to do, they're going to feel like it's a waste of their time to continue coming to meetings and serving this project. And the more invested with time and energy that people are, the more they will value the mission of what it is you're trying to do. So think about some tasks or activities that don't necessarily have to rest on your shoulders or your staff people's shoulders. Think about how you might be able to get volunteers from your advisory board or other stakeholders who can get involved to help sustain your project's activities. So another way to do this, steps to sustainability, is to conduct an annual SCOT analysis. I like to call it a SCOT because weaknesses can be built upon and they can be learned from. So I like to call it the strengths, challenges, opportunities, and threats. Conduct this SCOT analysis with your staff, with your advisory board. Okay, review the goals and objectives, and make sure that they're in alignment with what you discovered from your needs assessment in the beginning. And think about how you can better leverage the resources and partnerships that you have to achieve those goals and objectives. Any questions?
Just a few questions for follow-up. There was a question about the footer, and there was just asking for clarification. Does the footer have to be 12-point font, yes or no?
That doesn't matter. When we give the font size, we're more so talking about the actual, like, content. Like, that, as long as we can see that, that's fine. Like, it doesn't necessarily matter if that's 12. Like, no one's going to notice that.
I make those small too, and I also make the footers and headers as narrow as possible. And as far as footnotes and references that might be at the end of the document, I always make those. I start it at a 11 or a 10-point font, and I'll make them smaller if I have to, if it's just a matter of a few lines that I've gone over in my page count. And don't forget, if you repeat a footer or a citation immediately after one that you've already listed, you can just put IBID. You don't have to fill in the whole 2 or 3 line resource.
Great, thank you. And it does look like they responded to say it was for a footnote.
Good. I think we answered either way.
And then for the question regarding the research component is in regards to Purpose Area 3, and they were wondering, how do you suggest we address this component for the readers?
I'm going back to that research.
I can get them an answer for a person that would be better suited to answer that. If someone can just make sure I get the question, I can get it to the person ASAP, and we can probably have an answer by later today or first thing tomorrow.
I'd like to know what specific number to Purpose Area 3 are they referring?
And we can ask for clarification on that. Moving along, did Justine or James, did you want to continue with the presentation?
Yeah, I'll turn the time back over to James.
Sure. Thanks, Justine. Funding opportunities and training and technical assistance resources. Outside of CTAS, there's a number of funding opportunities at both OJP, at COPS, and OVW, and you can find those at their respective websites. When you go to those websites, I'm pretty sure that each one of the websites has a place where you can subscribe for more information. And if you do that for that particular component, you'll be given information every time a solicitation opens or closes, or there's some relevant information that you may find useful. So I would encourage you to sign up for those. And just know that CTAS isn't your only funding stream. As I just mentioned, I jumped ahead a little bit, but here's where you can kind of sign up, as I was talking about, for different things. But right here is for grants.gov. You can sign up for email notifications, and you can choose what type of agencies you're interested in receiving solicitation information about, or it can be by subjects or categories. So I would encourage you to sign up for that as well. That's another great opportunity to keep you abreast of funding opportunities. So there's an online guide that we created a few years ago for the Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation. And if you just go through it, it'll kind of help you, especially for those who've never applied for funding under CTAS before, it'll be very helpful. And even for those of you who may have, but it's been a while, it'd be a good refresher as well. And then it's kind of like an introduction to the strategic planning process. I won't bore you with going through everything on here, but I would encourage you to think about this as you're applying and mapping things out, and kind of think about the concepts that are here. As it relates to technical assistance, so you can think about it in a couple of different ways. There's certainly some technical assistance that can be given to you, as an applicant or a current grantee, but once you're awarded, each office has its own set of TTA providers or technical assistance providers that are here to help you be successful. None of the offices just want to give awards and just expect that you're going to do this great job. You can think of all of us as a team in this process. So we're here to help you in any way we can. That's federal staff, that's TA providers that we have for each of your awards. So, if you apply and you get funded, definitely reach out to us on that, and we can get you more specific information on that. But these are kind of some of the topic areas that some of our TTA providers are knowledgeable in. And we also have grants and financial training. So if you're awarded, there's specific financial training that you need. From the kind of pre-award process, it's everything that kind of talking about budgets and doing that kind of thing, the budget webinars that we've been hosting. All of those things are designed to help you out. And it's helpful now, but it's also helpful when you get awarded, because if you follow the advice that we give you now, your budget will be in shape when it's time for us to review it, and it'll be less likely that it's changed and corrected. Again, here's some additional areas that our TTA providers can help in: tribal courts, tribal civil and criminal legal assistance. Some of our TTA providers, individual TTA providers for different purpose areas or program offices, they can help you with transitional housing, they can help you with children and youth. So there's just a variety of things outside of what's here as well. I encourage if you do get awarded, to reach out to that specific office to find out what exactly TTA is provided for that award that you're given. Just some more areas that they can help in. I won't read these, but you can see those here. So when you're applying, and we're going to hope that everyone is applying, relatively soon. But if you run into technical issues, you would contact the GMS help desk, either by phone number or by email address. I always say email is good because it has a record. You kind of can prove that you reached out to someone. And then sometimes it's helpful to see a written response back when you're going back and trying to correct the issue or work through something. You can have the set of instructions that they provided back to you in email up as you're walking through it in real time. So that can be very helpful as well. The Response Center. So think of the Response Center, and the Response Center is managed by the COPS office, but ever since CTAS existence, you can think of the Response Center as kind of like the customer service desk of CTAS, and they're there to answer very basic questions. They are equipped with the solicitation and all the supporting documents. They have a purpose area point of contact list. So for each of the 10 purpose areas, they have a list of a specific contact person's name, phone number, and email address. So if it's a question that's too in the weeds that they can't answer, they can certainly get you over to an expert in that particular office and field. They are also going to be very helpful for you when it comes closing night. If you run into any kind of technical issues or what have you, I would encourage you to follow whatever advice that they give you, and also whatever advice that the GMS help desk gives you that day, because we will be reaching out to them with instructions on how to help you for that night. But just in general, the Response Center is a great source. They're our first line in terms of answering questions, and a lot of times they are able to answer the very basic questions. But like I said, they'll farm it out to each of us if it's something that they can't handle.
Can we launch the question? I feel I am prepared to write a successful grant application. Please select one of the following: yes, no, or I feel like I need more training. And our results are 59% yes, 5% no, and 36% I feel like I need more training. Do any of our presenters have any comments regarding the final poll question responses?
I'll say something to that. So I'm excited to see the high number of yeses. For the no's and for those who feel like they need more training, I'll just say this. It's all in how you think about it. For example, most of your proposal, we're telling you exactly what you need to submit. So for instance, certain attachments like a tribal resolution, you're just reaching out to your tribal chairman or your tribal council and getting that done and getting that signed off on. You know, the biggest things that I think worry folks or folks get a little stressed out about is having to create a budget and having to write the actual narrative. I know that but if you think about it, everything else is it's just a matter of going somewhere and gathering information that's probably already out there somewhere. You're just getting it signed off on. So that's why you have your checklist, and it really guides you through it. Like if you follow that checklist and then you look at the individual purpose areas to make sure that you're meeting whatever specific requirements they have, that's half the battle right there. And then, I know sometimes folks say, oh, we aren't grant writers, we aren't good at writing. I've seen some of the best narratives come from folks that aren't grant writers. That's not to say that grant writers aren't skilled, they definitely are, but I just say that to say that you don't always have to be a professionally trained grant writer to convey a good story and to convey the problem that's going on in your community. But I would also say partner with folks. For a lot of tribes, I know sometimes putting the proposals together falls on one person, but I would encourage you to work as a team. I would also encourage, if you have a close relationship with another tribe that's been very successful, I've found that tribes are often really good about helping each other out when someone reaches out and giving advice and guidance. Also, on the CTAS website, there's some samples of past successful applications. By no means should you copy those, but it just gives you some idea of how people who've gotten funded and scored very high chose to put their application together. But definitely don't worry. I just say make sure that you have the companion guide and solicitation right there by you. Pull out the checklist and just get to work. But it seems like a lot, but there's really a lot of information here to help you as well. And as I said, we're having another webinar on the 12th. We can address any other questions and concerns. Then too, if you still feel a little uneasy, that's what I would say to that. I don't know if Justine, if you have anything to add to that?
Well, I just hope that everyone would email or pose their questions here, and we're happy to try to respond to them as we get them. And thank you all for participating today.
We do have a couple of final questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
For the final questions, for the needs for the narrative profile, do we need to mention needs for all of the purpose areas that we're applying for?
I'm assuming they're talking about the tribal and community justice profile. I think that's the only way that that would make sense, because like that would be the only document where you would be talking maybe about more than one purpose area. So in that instance, like if you're applying to 3 or 4 purpose areas, I would definitely make sure that you address that for each of the ones that you're applying for in the tribal and community justice profile.
Great, thank you. And are tribal prosecutors considered law enforcement or tribal courts or criminal legal assistance?
I think it would depend on which office you're applying for. I guess I'm trying to understand the context in which they're asking the question. I know, for example, for Purpose Area 5, tribal prosecutors are an allowable cost. You can put in that position and funding towards that. But I think if that person could provide a little bit more clarity or email me, I just want to make sure that I'm giving a clear answer on that, but I'm not 100% sure if I know where they were going or their thought process with that question.
Okay, we'll ask for additional clarification. And then for additional follow-up on the research component, the follow-up is specifically on page 13 of the RFP. It states that Purpose Area 3 projects that incorporate a research component will receive special consideration. What does that mean?
In that kind of, I guess, perspective for BJA, they're looking for research in part on how you might reduce violent crimes in tribal communities. So I would definitely reach out to BJA on their whatever resource email or phone number that they provide, but that might be an example is like best practices on addressing violent crime in your community or responding to meth or opioids using like the criminal justice system, something that might provide other people in Indian country an idea of some best practices to respond to these most violent and drug-related crimes that you'll see in your community.
And we can certainly, I'll certainly ask Tris about that too. But I know, for example, with Purpose Area 5, we have similar language. It's not necessarily about research, but we have a couple of different priority areas in there for our office and for the program in which we're saying if applicants address any of those, we'll give priority consideration or special consideration. And essentially, what you can think of it as those applications would probably kind of raise higher up on our totem pole because they're addressing things that our office is very interested in. And so the same would apply there, but we can certainly get more clarity on exactly what that special consideration would look like.
Great, thank you. And in regards to the timelines for each purpose area, why did that get included into the narrative instead of being a standalone like it had been?
The reason for that is we're trying to come up with ways to streamline and cut things, because believe it or not, we put out an assessment every year on the current year's solicitation. And one of the things that we heard back is it's too many documents, it's too many things to submit. Is there something we can cut? And so we were trying to find ways to cut things. And so we were like, okay, maybe we can add this here. And believe it or not, also, a lot of times applicants weren't submitting separate timelines. They were already doing some type of version of a timeline in their narrative. So when we were looking at ways that we could get rid of things, we thought about what we see a lot. And a lot of times we see that in the narrative. So that's kind of the reason for that. And then also sometimes folks completely forget it. And so we also thought that, well, maybe if we attach it to something that's very important that they wouldn't forget, maybe it'll help with folks not forgetting to include the timeline. Because although it used to be 5% in the past and it's still kind of 5%, that's a very important 5%. A timeline can tell a lot.
Great, thank you, James and Justine. And there was a slide near the end on the technical assistance, and there's a line that said the TA providers can assist in the areas of, and it gives 6 bullet points, but prosecutors was not included into the bullet points. So there was a question of, is there technical assistance available for prosecutors? And if so, where do they fit into those bullet points? And the bullet points were Indian alcohol substance abuse, law enforcement, tribal courts, tribal civil and criminal legal assistance, corrections, alternatives to incarceration and reentry, and juvenile delinquency prevention and juvenile justice.
I know that DOJ as a whole, we do have some training available for prosecutors and other kind of things of that nature. We have a national advocacy center called the NAC, and they host trainings throughout the year in which prosecutors and other folks can attend. So yes, there is some training available. I'd have to get back to you on whether or not there's a specific TA provider that solely does that. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I do know that the NAC offers tons of training in that area.
I would agree with that, James, and also any of the TA providers associated with that Tribal Criminal Assistance, TCLA, and the Indian Alcohol Substance Abuse Program and Tribal Courts Assistance Program. Those entities that provide technical assistance are the Tribal Judicial Institute of the University of North Dakota School of Law, the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, and NIJA, Native American Indian Court Judges Association. I would say they're probably the main TA providers in the realm of CTAS. I agree with James, the NAC is fabulous, and their trainings are free. So would any technical assistance, but that would be after funding is awarded.
One other thing I would add to, and this is not related to that, as we mentioned, you know, Justine and I and other federal staff on other CTAS related webinars, you know, we certainly encourage you to reach out to us with your questions. But in keeping that in mind, I just want to be clear, there may be some things that we can't help with. For example, like you can't email us your timeline or narrative or any parts of your application and ask us to review that. We are legally not allowed to do that. It's considered giving an unfair advantage to an applicant over another applicant. So in no way are we able to review any material for this current solicitation that is open. However, though, if you applied for 2018 or 2017 and you weren't successful, and you're applying again this year and you want to talk to us about those past applications that have already been scored and reviewed, we could discuss those, but we can't discuss anything that you're submitting for this open solicitation.
Great, thanks James and Justine. Do any of our presenters or panelists have any final comments to share?
I think I would just say, you know, remember to kind of do those things that come in handy, like you should register for GMS by February 12th. You make sure you have clear file names. Complete any type of registration you may need, whether it's your SAMS registration, if you need a DUNS number. I would submit your application anywhere from 72 hours to a week or two ahead of time. You know, make sure that in the budget you list a clear POC for the budget, someone that when your application is going through the review process, that whoever needs to reach out can reach out and get quick and clear answers. If whatever POC information you submit with your application, if you realize that 2 or 3 weeks after you've submitted that information's changed, email us at tribalgrants@usdoj.gov and give us that new information. Be proactive in that sense. Make sure that you do an abstract. That really helps us out when we're going through. Well, the deadline's already passed if you needed to submit a paper application. So that was actually January 25th. But yeah, I mean, that's all I have to add. That's all I can think of right now.
And I just want to thank everyone for hanging with us for these last 2 hours. I really appreciate that. And just be considerate of this planning process that was outlined. It can be applicable to any program development, grant writing, or program implementation. And use the resources available to you and demonstrate that in your narrative. I think it looks very favorable to see the amount of support that is around your project as you describe it in your purpose area application.
And also, please make sure you read through your solicitation for each purpose area. Something that may be allowed in one purpose area may not be allowed in another purpose area.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful day.